I'll tell you a little bit about Cully. He is our single male polar bear, and again, similar to the grizzlies that we just met, Cully also came out of the wild. Cully was living up on Alaska's North Slope in an area called Point Lay. And in fact, his name Cully, K-A-L-I, he was named by the students that live in the community of Point Lay. Actually, this community is called Cully, and the students named him, so he kept that name. He did come out of the wild, and he's one of only 3 orphaned or rescue polar bears that are in North American zoos right now that are part of our AZA, our Association of Zoos and Aquariums. San Diego has one, Louisville has an animal, and we have one. And again, Cully is actually owned by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but we had built this beautiful new polar bear habitat for him. It's completely different than the old, you may remember the old bear grottos that we used to have here, but the standards have greatly changed since the old bear pits were built back in the late teens. So we have a natural substrate, a part of the habitat is natural substrate, and then that transitions to sand. And then obviously up near the pool, we have actually 2 pools for him. We have a deep pool, and then we have more of a shallow wading pool for him. The temperature in the pool, it's temperature controlled. So in the summertime, we typically keep that temperature at about 65 degrees Fahrenheit. In the wintertime, we drop that pool down to about 45 degrees just to keep the pipes from freezing. So he has access to that. It's salt water, so we have a whole saltwater system. And you can't really see it, but behind this wall here, first there are the 5 bedrooms, but just beyond that, there's a huge building for life support. And that has the large filters and everything. And I forget exactly what the footprint is, but it's close to the size of a basketball court. So it's quite large. So you don't even see that. So when you're looking at some of the exhibits, like the bear exhibits or polar bear, sea lion sound, half of the exhibit are what it takes to maintain these animals, maybe underground or in an area that you don't even see, but it's a very important part of keeping these guys healthy and comfortable. Also behind the wall here, I mentioned there are 5 bedrooms. We keep that temperature also at about 65 degrees in the summertime. And Cully has almost 24-hour access. Actually, it's about 22, 23 hours a day access to his back bedrooms. He can go back there anytime he wants. Now, when the keepers come in first thing in the morning, I mentioned the fact that they do ask the animals to go into the back holding bedroom areas. That's where they get their first meal. Then the keepers can secure them in the back. They can then go out in the habitat and do all the duties that they have to do out in the yard. Clean, pick, put out new enrichment, may have to clean the pools, those kinds of things. And that can take an hour to an hour and a half. They try to do that first thing in the morning. When they get finished with that, they then open up and then we'll clean the inside bedrooms. But once that's completed, then Cully can be, as I said, out on habitat or in the back. I'm going to try to call him one more time, see if maybe the 3rd time's a charm. Oh, Cully! Cully bear! Oh, Cully! Here he comes. Here comes that big guy. Now, hey, Cully! He's about ready to come out. Come on, Cully! So, I mentioned the fact that this is a male polar bear, and he's a large polar bear. There are 8 species of bears, and that's a question that we get frequently. Which is the largest of all the bears? Well, the way we answer that is that on average, the male polar bear is the largest terrestrial carnivore in the world. And his weight will fluctuate from 1,250 pounds up to 1,400 pounds, depending on the time of the year, the season. And right now, he's right around 1,350 pounds. That is a big bear. Even though there are some individuals that may grow larger than that, he's a big boy. He's the largest polar bear that we've had, that I've ever worked with, and over 10 bears that I've worked with. Cully is by himself, and that's a question. There are 2 questions that we get frequently. One is, why is he living by himself, and does he need a companion? And then the other question, which we get for other Arctic species as well, how does an animal like a polar bear that evolved to live up in the Arctic Circle, how does that animal adapt to St. Louis summers? Well, let me talk about the companion issue first. With most large carnivores, except for a few individuals, we know that there are social carnivores, that we're familiar with some of the canids and hyenas that live in clans and groups and so forth, but most of your large carnivores, when they become adults, they live a solitary lifestyle. So it's perfectly natural. Once he became an adult at about 4 to 5 years of age, he is now 7 years old. Once he became an adult, he would live the rest of his life by himself. Now, would he seek out a female companion during breeding season? Late spring, early summer? Of course he would. But unfortunately, in our population in North America today, the polar bear species survival plan, I'll tell you more about that later, but there are currently less than 60 polar bears that are in our North American zoo population. And if you split that in half, you have about half females, half males. You're looking at maybe 30 pairs. And when you filter out the post-breeding age animals, the animals that are geriatric, that are no longer capable of breeding, and then you filter out the younger animals that haven't reached maturity yet, we're talking about a population, a breeding population of probably fewer than a dozen pairs. This particular bear here, I mentioned earlier that he's actually owned by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He is on loan to the St. Louis Zoo. And part of the permit to keep him here in St. Louis, there is a restriction on breeding this bear. Any bears that have come out of the wild, and I mentioned the 2 other bears, we can't legally put him with a female and breed him right now. Now, we are working with Fish and Wildlife Service. We're trying to change the language of that permit because that permit was probably written many years ago. There were different reasons for doing it at that time. But now, because our population is so small, we realize the importance of maintaining an ex-situ population, a population in our zoos to try to maintain the genetic diversity, and that we would very much like to be able to breed him because he is a young animal, he's a founder animal, he came out of the wild, we believe that he's not related to any other polar bears in our population, so we would very much like to breed him. But it wouldn't make sense for us currently to bring in a female that we can't physically put him with. And there are no females available currently for him to go with. So that's the companion part of it, but he's perfectly fine living by himself. He gets lots of enrichment. You saw one of the keepers that came out earlier was up on top. They come out throughout the day. Sometimes we'll call him into the back. They'll come out, they'll change out his enrichment. They give him all kinds of different types of enrichment like we do for all our animals here at the zoo. So it remains novel. They change out things every day. So he gets plenty of interaction. And he actually really does enjoy interacting with our visitors, just like the grizzlies do. So it's really fun to watch these guys sometimes when they're up against the glass, and they really do pay attention to people. So that's enriching for them. The other question that I mentioned earlier was about the heat issue. And that's really an interesting phenomenon because polar bears, they are well designed to live in an Arctic environment. And they're really an aquatic mammal, a water mammal, an aquatic water species, where they're designed to live in and around the oceans. And everything on a polar bear is designed to keep them warm, keep them dry. And they're excellent swimmers. But if you look at how they're designed, they have a very thick coat. They have under fur, and then they have an outer fur coat. And we see what looks like white. A polar bear looks like it's white. If you shave off what appears to be white hair, and you look at a hair shaft under a microscope, there is no color. It's transparent. The only reason that we see white is that all the colors in the spectrum are absorbed by the light shaft, but white light reflects off the shaft, and we see what appears to be white. But they have coal black skin, and that's an adaptation, obviously, for absorbing heat. He also has hollow hairs, which add to buoyancy and help keep him warm when he's in the water. They have a much straighter backbone than the other grizzlies we know with the humped back, and black bears, which is an adaptation for decreasing resistance when they're swimming in the water. They're excellent swimmers. And and their sense of smell is amazing. And in fact, I read a research paper a couple years ago, and they were comparing the sense of smell of a polar bear to that of a bloodhound dog. And this particular researcher had counted the number of scent receptors inside their nose and determined that the density, the number of scent receptors that a polar bear had was 7 times the number of scent receptors. They had the same number of sites, but the number of scent receptors was 7 times. And through extrapolation, this particular researcher theorized that a polar bear may have 7 times the sense of smell as a bloodhound dog. And we know what bloodhound dogs are capable of smelling. So you might say, well, why does a polar bear need this incredible sense of smell? Well, if you look at where they live in a very remote, large area, hundreds of thousands of square miles, that a male polar bear may have to travel great distances to find his prey, or her prey, to find a mate, and they need that sense of smell to maybe smell a ringed or bearded seal, which is their most common prey. They might have to travel 20 to 30 miles to find that, and sometimes these animals are under the ice. So they need a pretty good sense of smell. The other thing that I just learned recently is that they use that sense of smell to find their mate. And since they're spread out over such a large area, that a polar bear male may be capable of smelling a female who is in estrus up to 100 miles away. Because when she is in estrus, she's now excreting hormones through the bottom pads of her feet. So she'll leave a track. And then the male will smell that track and hopefully find that female up to 100 miles away. So that's why they've evolved to have this incredible sense of smell. They also have a good sense of vision, which is a little different than your brown and black bears. I should also mention too that we have several other exotic species of bears. We have the Andean bear, also known as the spectacled bear, the only bear found in South America. And then up at River's Edge, we have the Malayan sun bear, which is the smallest of the 8 species of bears. So this is the largest. Also, there are some brown bears that will reach weights over 1,500 pounds. That's not the average. But there are individual brown bears that can grow very large. These are those coastal bears, the Kodiak bears, the Kamchatka bears that I mentioned earlier. But on average, this is the largest of all the bears. Any questions?
Cully's a big bear. How thick is this glass?
Yes, both the grizzly and this glass here is 2 inches thick, and it's 4-layer laminated glass. And it's my understanding, this is one of the things we work with engineers when we have to decide what kind of glass we're going to use. This can receive an impact from a pickup truck that's traveling at like 30 miles per hour to run into it. The way it's designed is that if it receives an impact on this layer here, this layer may shatter, or the one behind it may shatter, but the other layers remain intact. Very similar to a car window when it gets shattered. So it's very strong. Yes.
Cool. And one more question. You've used the term enrichment a lot. Could you explain a little bit what that means?
Yeah, enrichment is basically trying to offer the animals stimulation, because we know that this is not perfect, and that in the wild these animals would be using foraging behaviors and be exploring their habitat, always looking for food. So we probably now, we have an enrichment committee here at the zoo, and one of their directives is to try to come up with as many different types of safe types of enrichment. It can be food, it can be artificial type items. You'll see a lot of natural things. We have a lot of natural logs, branches, vegetation, that a lot of it we harvest here on the grounds. We have tree trunks that are in here. We have some that are gunite, some that are natural. We're just basically trying to stimulate the animals and enrich them both physically as well as psychologically. Because these are very intelligent animals. Bears are intelligent animals, and they do require a certain level of stimulation. Also, we're standing in front of these doors right here. There's 2 glass panel doors and then the 2 steel mesh doors. And these doors serve a very important purpose. One is that it allows the keepers to come out to do interactions with the polar bear. And what those interactions are is that there would be one person who's asking Cully to do certain behaviors. The other person would then be a narrator like myself, standing here and explaining why we condition Cully to do certain behaviors. Many of the animals here at the zoo now are being conditioned to do behaviors so that we can better examine the animals. Our veterinarians can palpate, inject if they need to receive an antibiotic injection or an anesthetic. So we teach them to do certain behaviors. And Cully knows to do about 6 different behaviors. One of the first things that you do, just like your dog at home, you'll take a piece of food and you get your dog, not a cat, but you get your dog to target, and then you start to train them or condition them to either sit, to lay down, to sit up, or whatever. We do the same kind of thing here with positive reinforcement, with a positive reward. So when the animals do the behavior that we want them to do, they will get a food reward. We don't punish them for if they don't do it, they just don't get the reward. But he has learned to do different behaviors. Now we'll do some of the behaviors out here. We'll have him stand up. They always have a pole or a stick or a meat stick so that we never have to put our hands directly on him. So they can do that with a long pole because he's very tall. He's now over 9.5 feet tall. And I don't know if we still have the measurement, but we used to have we used to have measurement inside on the wall there. So when he would stand up, we could see how tall he is, and he's now about 9.5 feet tall. So we'll get him to present his hip, his shoulder, and even more importantly, in the back, we have what are called foot ports. We have these, it looks like a box, and Cully will actually put his paw into this foot port where now we're able to draw blood from his paw vein so we can then analyze that blood and use that for all kinds of things. And he'll press his hip, his shoulder. He opens his mouth on cue, so obviously we can look at his teeth, make sure he doesn't have any issues there. So again, as I mentioned, we're doing this for a lot of our animals here at the zoo, and it's less stressful for them, and it's less stressful for us. So it serves a very important purpose.